Hello, and welcome to the fourth day and actually the last session here of the 2023 National Virtual CARES Act Conference. Today, we've spent the afternoon focused on administrative and financial controls as we explore our grantees as a peer-to-peer training model, how they have enforced continuity of operations within their organization. This third session here follows the previous two that have been focused on internal controls, program income, loan funds, and programs that have revolving loan funds. In this one, we're going to talk about managing the flow, which is really about grantees managing not only their cash flow, but the flow of their grants themselves as they've implemented them. This one will kind of round out this administrative and financial controls topic period here. And so far, we've had some good engagement in terms of discussion. And we would like to encourage you to use the Q&A box down at the bottom to put any questions you have for our presenters today. If you look on our screen, these are our grantees that will be joining us today to talk about this. And I would like to turn that time over to them now. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Crystal Latier, and I am the Executive Director of Economic Development here at El Paso County, Colorado. In El Paso County, we really take a holistic approach to economic development, meaning that we focus on three main areas: business incentives, affordable housing initiatives, as well as community development initiatives. Our CDBG program falls within our community development initiatives section of our department. I think it's great that we have these three disciplines together because any public policy that we're making in one of those disciplines obviously is impacting the others. As you all know, the CDBG program is a long-standing HUD program since 1974. El Paso County, Colorado is a relatively new grantee. We became designated as an entitlement community in 2009. So since 2009, we've received approximately $1 million annually in CDBG funding. And since our program's inception, we've been able to help over 215 community programs or projects with CDBG funding. For those of you who are not familiar with El Paso County, Colorado region, we are about an hour south of Denver. The largest city within our region is Colorado Springs. Many of you may be familiar with Colorado Springs, but Colorado Springs is its own entitlement community. So for the El Paso County program, we focus on the 7 outlying municipalities, as well as large pockets of unincorporated. El Paso County is actually over 2,000 square miles, so larger than the state of Rhode Island. So within that makeup, you can imagine those 7 municipalities and large pockets of unincorporated have diverse needs in diverse ways that our CDBG funding impacts those communities. Today, I'm happy to be with you to share a little bit about how we manage the flow. And I'll be discussing particularly how we use partnerships, procedures, and technical assistance to ensure timely, compliant use of our CDBG funding. The first topic I want to talk about is the program or structures that we have and procedures in place around our application process. We conduct an annual application process each year with similar timing dates so that everyone in the community is well aware of that. So it's a recurring process that folks can count on. Additionally, we provide in-depth technical assistance and webinars specific to the application process and how it works here within El Paso County. I did also want to highlight through that application process, typically we have a 30-day window when we accept applications annually, and we ensure that everyone attends a webinar. And if you are a first-time applicant, it is strongly encouraged that you meet one-on-one with staff to discuss your potential project, just to ensure that we're all on the same page regarding potential regulations that may impact that project. When we receive those applications, we review those with what is known as our Community Development Advisory Board. So this is a 12-member volunteer board, and that makeup is the 7 municipalities that I earlier mentioned. They all have 1 appointment, as well as our 5 county commissioner districts have 1 appointment. And so this is a great way to have a volunteer board provide additional assistance to staff to review those applications and provide recommendations on what should be funded. As everyone on this call today knows, we always have more need than resource, and so it is always a very competitive process. Having that diverse makeup of the board really also helps us be in tune with community needs. Obviously, we all go through an extensive consolidated planning process and are very involved in the community, but to review applications with members of the community where those applications are coming from is also very helpful because they are kind of the boots on the ground. And so if there's a potential infrastructure project, it would be important that perhaps the planning department knows about that. That can potentially show shovel readiness. The final approval process works in that those recommendations are provided to the Board of County Commissioners for final public approval. Obviously, we follow all of the annual action plan requirements with comment periods and public meetings as well. But I really think having that structure in place for the application process, as well as that recommending body, is very helpful. When you have that structure you kind of set a foundation from the very beginning so that folks know that we're looking for shovel-ready projects, right? So we reiterate that your project should be completed within 12 months. That again helps with timeliness. None of us want to commit funds to projects that are 3 years out when we are measured on timeliness by HUD on an annual basis. Additionally, reminding folks about the importance of providing clear, measurable outcomes, tangible things that will happen with our CDBG funds. The letters of support are also helpful because that shows a kind of community support partnerships happening, but it also ensures that there's not duplication of services happening in the community. And then lastly, just really showcasing great checks and balances and internal processes and procedures helps ensure that we can prevent fraud. The next way that we really provide additional partnerships and structures to help with timeliness of the program and efficient flow is something that we do known as kind of our subrecipient technical assistance. I think this is a very valuable tool that sometimes is overlooked. If you are granted subrecipient, or if you are granted CDBG funding and will become a subrecipient, we require every entity to go through what we call our subrecipient orientation. It is essentially a 2 to 3 hour class that really goes over, and all of you parents on the call will know why I came up with this subtitle many years ago, starting the program, What to Expect when you're expecting CDBG funds, right? So when we became an entitlement community in 2009, this was a relatively new form of federal funding for our area, but we found value in continuing our subrecipient orientations or trainings so that anyone receiving CDBG funds that year really knows what to expect. They know what to expect as far as paperwork and processes, how all of that goes. And we usually use this time as a great way to have an interactive training, meaning that we encourage folks to share best practices about grant management with each other in the room. We also do exercises where they have sample quarterly reports to fill out or sample reimbursement requests to fill out. So before they actually ever have to do it for their own project, they've had an experience, walked through the training, walked through the different lines, had in-depth technical assistance. And so when the time comes for the projects to get started, they are really truly ready to go, hit the ground running, and get those projects delivered to the community. Additionally, we have a subrecipient resources webpage. So many of the resources, best practices, tips, forms, all those things that we talk about within the orientation live forever on a web page that we refer folks to on a routine basis so that they have easy access and 24/7 access to all those resources to help them be successful with their CDBG funding. We also engage in other robust technical assistance opportunities, engagements such as pre-construction conferences to ensure that everyone is on the same page about Davis-Bacon regulations. So we'll start those through the pre-bid process. So before it ever goes out kind of to bid, to pre-construction, to obviously things like on-site Davis-Bacon interviews. Another great thing to have in place is really the internal way that you project manage or manage all of your subrecipients and grants throughout the year. we have a very robust procedures manual internally for how we handle the CDBG program and other financial operations within our department. That's something that we refer to frequently within our department. And a lot of times I think folks create procedure manuals one time, right? And then they kind of just go away and we don't update those. We're very intentional about making sure that at least on a semi-annual basis, the entire team is looking at that procedures manual again and updating it. And not only updating it, but having discussions about, is there a more efficient way to do a process that would help us remain in compliance or get to the end result a little bit quicker? So frequently looking at your internal processes and procedures manual, I think is very valuable for any grantee. Additionally, we also conduct what I call lunch and learns. And so that is our staff provides lunch and learns to other staff, right? We all have our own kind of functions or roles within the CDBG program. I think it's very valuable for everyone to, at least at a high level, understand what others are doing. They see how the pieces fit together and how a kind of delay in one area can really be a big hiccup for the project overall. So providing those lunch and learn opportunities for folks to share about their specific actions related to the CDBG program and how they fit with their teammates is very valuable. And then two kind of very high level things that I think we kind of can never overemphasize is the importance of organization and consistency. So how are you organizing your program, your files? How are you consistently applying processes and procedures? Those things have shown true value and really helped with the administration of our CDBG program here in El Paso County. In regards to kind of the financial policies and procedures, there's a few items I want to highlight that have been successful. For instance, planning budgets. So that's kind of pre-year happening. What does that planning budget look like? Why this one is so important is because I think a lot of hiccups happen when we're looking at some of our caps, right? Public service caps or our administrative cap. And so if you have good planning budgets in place, knowing regardless of if old funds are coming back in, but you have a set budget that says, for this grant period, we're not going over 15% for our public service cap, and really use that planning your program you're moving forward. I think that has been very helpful. I had mentioned earlier, but that reimbursement request training process that we have through our subrecipient orientation, that is very helpful. I'm sure all of us have been in the situation where someone requests reimbursement with little to no backup documentation. And, that's never helpful, the back and forth, the timing, that's, not a good use of anyone's time. So really training your subrecipients from the get-go on what's the expectation on backup documentation to kind of prove that expenditure and remain in compliance with all CDBG regulations, so that when they are submitted, it can move through your processes at a quicker pace. Again, just those having a great flow of processes and probably more importantly, that separation of duties, right? That's something that we talk about quite a bit in relation to fraud too. How are you ensuring that there are more than one set of eyes on a reimbursement request or processing of payment to ensure nothing is missed? And lastly, I wanted to highlight that we also conduct a monthly reconciliation of IDIS financials versus our internal financials. And so that's proved to be very successful, and I would encourage everyone to do that. It's much easier to find a penny missing through a month worth of expenditures than if you waited till you're doing your PR 26 or something at the end of your program year. So if there's a way for you to reconcile IDIS financials and drawdowns monthly with internal, it's really helped us kind of stay on track, keep funds flowing, ensuring that everything is recorded appropriately. And then lastly, just wanted to share kind of 4 key themes that I think have really helped drive our CDBG initiative and goals and ensure the flow of our program is managed and communicated across all of our program partners. So the first one we've talked a lot about today already, partnerships. Really being engaged in those supportive, positive, and effective partnerships. Truly, collaboration is key here with CDBG funding, from HUD to the grantee, from the grantee to the subrecipient. We all share joint responsibility in carrying out those activities and serving the community well. Regulatory compliance and performance. Performance measurement is a really effective management technique that helps us ensure that the benefits of these taxpayer dollars are done well. And so having robust quarterly reports or expectations, why I also think that quarterly reports are helpful is not only to see the great work that's happening, but if you see that no work is happening, that's a red flag, right? How can I work with this subrecipient? Perhaps they need more technical assistance. And so if you're checking in at least on a quarterly basis, you're able to kind of mitigate any issues that might come up, as well as discussing appropriate ways that you want to measure performance. I think anyone that's working in your community truly wants to be successful. Sometimes we just need more capacity building in that regard. All right, and then the number one rule that I always say for any type of federal grant reporting: documentation, documentation, documentation. So we really stress that point with our subrecipients to ensure that we know great work is happening. We know there are great intentions and efforts happening, but we need documentation to tangibly prove all of that great work happening in the community when we're reporting back to HUD. And then lastly, just those effective management practices. So again, supporting those cooperative and proactive relationships among HUD, your grantee or the county, and your subrecipients. All being on the same page about we're all working towards continuous improvement in both regulatory compliance and program performance. We want to maintain kind of an open dialogue and frequent communication, and always take a proactive approach instead of a reactive approach when administering CDBG funds. And at this time, I'd love to turn it over to our friend Ben in the City and County of San Francisco.
Thanks, Crystal. My name is Benjamin McCloskey. I'm one of 4 deputy directors at San Francisco's Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development. And I manage the finance and administration functions for that city department. Within San Francisco, MOHCD, as we call it, is the city department that manages CDBG, ESG, home, and HOPWA. And we also partner with some of our other city departments. For example, with CDBG, we partner with the city's Office of Economic Development, Economic and Workforce Development. So I think a lot of people probably know where San Francisco is, in the middle of California on the coast. San Francisco has been a CDBG entitlement grantee since the beginning of CDBG. And I was able to look up at the very beginning what our entitlement amount was, and it's actually more than it is now, which kind of surprised me. Our current year CDBG entitlement is about $18 million. And in the current year, just roughly to give you a sense of how we deploy our CDBG in San Francisco, about 30% of our CDBG entitlement is dedicated to either rehabilitation of housing or purchase of land for future affordable housing development. About 17% is in partnership with our Office of Economic and Workforce Development around economic and workforce grants to community-based organizations or nonprofit organizations that provide services within the city. And about 15% of our entitlement is dedicated to eviction prevention and housing stabilization grants, again, to our nonprofit partners. And in this area has been a lot of synergies between our regular CDBG and the CDBG CV grant amounts because of across the country, all of the impacts that COVID had with people's stability in their housing. And we were really able to pick up on some of our existing housing stabilization and eviction prevention programs and add with some of the CDBG CV funding. I want to really thank Crystal for her presentation. There's a lot of similarities between what El Paso County does and what San Francisco does as far as timing, expectations, and support for CDBG subrecipients and projects. I'm going to talk a little bit more from a budget or accounting perspective, but there'll also be some similarities and overlaps just from a little bit different perspective than what Crystal shared. We have 5 best practices for managing the flow. The first, and we're gonna go through each of these, but just as an overview. First, utilize institutional knowledge and assign dedicated staff to the CDBG program. Make friends with your finance team and accountants, for those of you who are not finance people. Make your action plan budgets as specific as possible, and of course, keep those caps in mind. Follow a regular schedule or cadence, and we'll talk more about what some of the things that San Francisco does there. And then finally, pair a strong accounting system with a strong grants management system if you're going to be making grants to different nonprofit organizations. So first, utilizing institutional knowledge and assigning dedicated staff. We're super lucky in San Francisco that we have a lot of institutional knowledge within our city government as far as managing CDBG is concerned. We have one staff person who's been working in the office the entire time that CDBG has existed. And our federal compliance lead has been working in our office for almost 30 years. And I realize that I'm saying this, and some of you might be like, oh my goodness, how, like, I can't even relate to that because I just got thrown into this and I'm trying to learn on my own from webinars and various published materials. I'm not saying this to say that you need to have people who've been working on CDBG for a long time, but it's definitely helpful. And in any case, think about CDBG, about learning how to drive or bike. You learn some of the rules, you kind of get them in your mind and in your body, you think more about the flow of things, and it becomes much easier. And then you can pass that information along to other people in your organization. If you're in an organization where you're lucky enough to have more than 1 or 2 people who are working on CDBG, do as much cross-training as possible. Help if someone's working in one area of CDBG and someone's working in another area of CDBG, talk as much as possible, help each other understand what each other is doing. And whenever there's staff turnover, again, if possible, try to do some face-to-face training with whoever is going to be coming on board next. And if that's not going to be possible, try to be sure that your policies and your procedures and your daily workflows are documented as much as possible, so that if you don't have someone there who's been around for 30 years and knows the ins and outs of a particular part of the program, as you have staff turnover and as you move along, you can still not lose the experience that you've developed as an organization. The second tip, make friends with your finance team and accountants. These are some of the folks who work on my team. We went bowling as a team building activity. And I know that some people on this call probably are more on the finance or accounting side of things, and some people on this call are probably more on the programmatic side of things. So this is more a message for the people who are programmatically managing CDBG. Your finance folks, your accountants, they live for keeping things neat and orderly and within parameters. It's gonna bother them if something is 1 cent off. So use those skills to your advantage. Help your finance team understand CDBG. Send them to trainings, have internal brown bags, bring them on site visits. A lot of accounting and finance folks would love to be able to go out and see a project that they've been processing payments for, and actually see what was built or what services are provided. Do cross training again between the finance folks and the program folks to help each other speak each other's language and support each other as much as possible in problem solving. And finally, whenever you're thinking about anything related to CDBG and managing the flow or caps, bring your finance colleagues in on the conversation. Say to them, for example, hey, there's this specific cap in CDBG, it's 20%, here's how it's calculated. Do you have any ideas within our system, within our context, about how we should best structure things to make sure that we are not going to exceed that cap? Next tip, make those action plan budgets as specific as possible, and of course, keep those caps in mind. The key to knowing that the funds are going to flow as you expect them to flow is to have everything as specific and clear as possible, ideally before the spending starts. So one example of something to avoid is to say in your action plan, oh, we're going to give $500,000 of grants for capital improvements, but then not really have a clear idea about how that's going to happen or how it's going to be deployed. You're really just setting yourself up for delays in spending. You can set up specific budgets so that you don't exceed the administrative and public services caps. And this is a great time to talk to your finance team. Ask them, how would they set up in the system, segregate the funds in such a way that you're actually not going to be able to exceed the admin or public services caps. But in order to do that, you have to have specific planning in advance. And Crystal touched on this in her presentation. She used the term shovel ready. That's a great phrase. I've described it here as consider only committing funding if all the approvals and designs are completed and construction is ready to start. One of the things that San Francisco uses our CDBG funding for is renovations of various nonprofit community-owned facilities. So for example, a senior center needs a new roof, or a neighborhood center needs its HVAC system replaced. And these community centers are serving low and moderate income people. We within the city government have staff who help the nonprofits from our side of things, as far as helping them understand the rules and the structure and all the various requirements they need to follow for the CDBG spending. But at the end of the day, it's the nonprofit partners, the subrecipients, who are the ones who need to actually hire the architects, figure out with their board what the design's going to look like, work with the contractors, etc. And that's great, and as it should be, but it can cause problems in the spending realm. Often, this isn't their number one priority. Yes, they know they need a new roof, but they also are trying to meet immediate community people needs of people who are walking in their doors. And often they don't have a lot of expertise in this area. They maybe haven't, other out than maybe in their personal lives, maybe they've never managed a bigger construction project before, so they don't even really understand all of the steps. And from the city side of things, we can try to help them along and teach them and point them in the right direction. But a lot of times these projects often take much longer than is anticipated because of this this lack of experience and this prioritization. So previously, San Francisco would enter into CDBG grant agreement with some of these nonprofit organizations and set up activities in IDIS right away. And sometimes they wouldn't spend right away. They'd have to still iron out a lot of these questions about what is the design going to look like, who's the architect going to be, is our board of directors on board, do they have any other things they want to do at the same time? And we wouldn't really see a lot of spending, and that creates timeliness issues, and we end up with money just kind of sitting around. We were ending up with money just kind of sitting around for a while for some of these capital projects. What we try to do now is this shovel-ready concept that Crystal mentioned. We really only try to enter into a CDBG grant agreement with a subrecipient and set up activities in IDIS once the project is ready to start construction. Once we know that they figured out all of those details, once we know that that they're going to actually have spending soon, is when we actually enter into those grant agreements and set it up in IDIS. Now, what that means is that we then let them know, hey, we have CDBG funding set aside for you and your project. Here's the parameters within which we're going to move forward. Here's what you need to do first. And that's been a lot more successful than formally committing funding to those projects when there's still a little bit more to do. Following a regular schedule or regular cadence, again, Crystal touched on this a little bit. I'll frame it slightly differently, broken up into things that in San Francisco we do either annually, quarterly, or monthly. Of course, on an annual basis, everybody has to do their action plan, but the action plan can be the moment where you partner with your finance team and do the budget setup. Make sure that in your accounting system, what is set up in your accounting system is easily tied to what's in your action plan, and work on a plan for deploying the funding that's articulated in your action plan. And ideally for things that are going to be spent over just a 1-year period. And then of course, at the end of the year, do your CAPER reporting. On a quarterly basis, do a check-in. Where are we at with the budget overall? How are we doing on our timeliness? Is there anything that seems a little bit out of whack? What's going on with our program income? You really need to pay attention to program income if you're an entity that has any that's coming in, and at least quarterly pay attention to what those receipts look like and what the reporting obligations are and how that impacts any of your other assumptions. And then every month, require an update from each of the projects that is doing the work. What does their spending look like? And draw it down in IDIS every month so that there's a clear understanding on your HUD rep's part as well about where you're at as far as spending is concerned and project progress. Finally, if you're making grants to nonprofit organizations who are doing different kinds of work, pair a strong accounting system with a strong grants management system. You really need a way to very clearly and systematically track not only the financial side of the grants that you're making, but also the programmatic reporting. So your financial system and IDIS and the grants management system should all be in sync. And each of those, what we found in San Francisco makes the most sense is that if there's a one-to-one relationship between each of those. So one, whatever you call it in your financial system, I'll just use a bucket. One financial bucket in your financial system aligns with one activity in IDIS, which would then align with one account or whatever you call it, project in your grants management system. And maintaining that one-to-one relationship between all of those is going to be really helpful in making sure that you don't make a mistake somewhere. Many years ago, we had a grants management system and a financial system in IDIS, but they slowly got out of sync. One penny off here, $100 off here, $50,000 off here. Someone makes a change in the grants management system, but then it doesn't trickle over into IDIS. Things really got out of whack, and we had to spend some time to resync it all and to reconcile across all the three systems. And now we have what we call a three-part form. So anytime a change is made in one of these three systems, we know, okay, we need to have the change reflected in the other two. So it's documented, each of the steps and who's going to do it. What is our goal? What are we trying to accomplish? What money are we moving and why? And then who did it and on what date? And that really helps us stay in sync. And with that, thanks very much for listening. I'm going to hand it over to Andy Taylor and Alexis Delgado from the city of Worcester, Massachusetts.
Thank you, Benjamin. Appreciate that. And good afternoon, everyone. As Ben mentioned, my name is Andy Taylor, and I am the Assistant Chief Development Officer for the City of Worcester's, Worcester, Massachusetts' Economic Development Department. And with me is Alexis Delgado.
Hello, I'm Alexis Delgado. I am the Grants Compliance Manager in the Admin and Finance Office for the City of Worcester.
So my role as Assistant Chief Development Officer in the Executive Office of Economic Development is grants management and compliance. So the Executive Office of Economic Development with the City of Worcester is the department tasked with administering all HUD entitlement funds. So those funds come through EOED, and my responsibility is just to make sure I'm working with all the departments within EOED to make sure we're spending that money, and being compliant and getting, those dollars out the door in a timely manner. And our department works very closely with the Budget and Finance Office throughout the entire process. So we can jump right in. So City of Worcester is the second largest municipality in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We have a population of 206,518 residents. And as a result, the city is also the second largest HUD entitlement community in the state. So, we're getting an allocation each year, roughly of 4 million or above. So you can see that our CDBG allocation for program year 48, July 22 to June 23, was 4,232,467. We'll be seeing a slight reduction in this upcoming year to 4,077,241, but we're usually in that 4 million range, give or take. Our CARES Act number, when those programs are being rolled out, our CARES Act number was 4,679,798. So as you can see, we actually got more in CARES Act than we do in our annual entitlement. So that's, that's where we stand with our, our program each and every year. And when it comes to CDBG and CDBG CV, Worcester uses those funds traditionally for public and supportive service activities, food insecurity programs, youth activities, job training, et cetera, public facility and infrastructure improvement projects. In the past, we have used CDBG to purchase firefighting apparatus. We've purchased a number of fire trucks over the past several years, as well as some other fire safety equipment. And obviously a large portion of our CDBG money goes into housing rehabilitation each year. Worcester has an aging housing stock, a number of, multifamily, older, properties. So a lot of that money goes into rehabbing those types of properties. And just to touch on Worcester, Massachusetts, and where we are in the Commonwealth, we sit pretty much directly in the middle, and that gives us the nickname of the heart of the Commonwealth. You'll see from the map that we are almost smack dab in the middle. So we are centrally located in the state. So the City of Worcester's Executive Office of Economic Development and the Office of Administration and Finance, the Budget Office, we work really close together throughout the entire CDBG program year to make sure all internal controls and compliance measures are satisfied. This partnership has made us, one of the more efficient programs in Region 1, and we're really proud of that relationship. So with the OED and budget being so involved throughout, the entire process, we've been able to implement a number of internal controls just to, safeguard as we take care of payments, contracts, those kinds of, activities. So to guarantee every payment receives a thorough review and appropriate approval from both divisions, each project cash request that comes through for reimbursement goes through a multi-prong approach. And this is something that we implemented roughly 10 years ago. We as a city made the decision to essentially tear down all of our programs the way that they were functioning, and we rebuilt everything from the ground up. We rebuilt all of our programs from how we, put our RFP out, what that looks like, how we handle our contracts, what those look like, our scopes, our cost per units, how we handle our, project cash requests, how do we handle reimbursement, what we require as part of that process. We also, improved our monitoring, how we, handle our subrecipient monitoring. And what we've done is the way we've structured our programs is we are doing constant desk monitorings. The level of backup that we get per project cash request for each agency allows us to do a desk monitoring. So we feel very comfortable that if we're paying on 50 clients, we're seeing documentation on 50 clients. So, we feel good about that. And then our on-site monitoring, we improved how we do that and how we handle activities right through to closeout. And again, that has been a partnership, with budget that has worked really well for us. And, as part of that safeguarding to make sure we're doing everything the right way, we have brought this multi-tier review approach into everything we do. So whether it's a subrecipient contract to a payment, on average, 5 to 6 people are not only reviewing these items, but they're signing off on them and approving them. So we know that they are being reviewed by multiple folks. So on every payment, as I was starting to touch on before, we will have the project monitor who's assigned to oversee the activity, review the documentation and sign off on it. That then goes to the division director. So whoever's running, for example, the director of housing or neighborhood development director within EOED will then review it and sign off. It then comes to the assistant chief development officer in charge of grants management and compliance, which is myself. I will then review that. It'll then go downstairs to our grant financial analyst in budget. And then it will make its way to the grants compliance manager in budget, which is Alexis. It'll then be moved on to auditing for a final payment. So again, we've implemented this multi-tier approach to reviewing things, and it has worked out very, very well for us. And it's important to note that both the programmatic and budget staff regularly attend HUD and NCDA trainings to stay current on all compliance related items. So, having two departments fully versed in the Code of Federal Regulations for CDBG and CDBG-CV is something that has allowed Worcester to really operate at the highest level specific to compliance. So in addition to daily dialogue, EOED and budget, we have quarterly meetings to discuss the status of ongoing projects in IDAS. And these meetings allow, for both departments to be fully aware of activity timelines, funding levels, and where the city stands with respect to timeliness expenditure. So City of Worcester, when it comes to levels of efficiency, the City of Worcester uses the following approach with our applications and the awarding of subrecipient agreements. So we'll issue an RFP in December and also provide a technical assistance workshop for interested parties who may or may not be new to the CDBG process. It's been a very worthwhile process for us, and I think folks that attend would say the same thing. It gets them up to speed on what's going to be required. Applications are accepted by city staff and then scored by what we call our Community Development Advisory Committee, CDAC. And those funding recommendations are then sent to the city manager, who then gets those on to the appropriate city subcommittee, city council subcommittee before full city council approval. So upon approval of subrecipients, just want to look at that. So what happens at that point is subrecipient agreements will then be sent on and reviewed for their cost per unit and their budget down to our budget office. And then contracts are then sent back to programmatic and budget staff for additional review and approval before full execution. Once everybody internally is happy and satisfied with what those contracts look like from a scope perspective, from a budget perspective, and a cost per unit perspective, then we go ahead and we have the assigned project monitor complete the environmental review per the requirements of 24 CFR Part 58. And again, that subrecipient agreement or contract will go through a similar type process to our payments, where it'll go from the project monitor to the division head to the compliance director, budget and finance compliance, and then back to the department head, in this case our chief development officer, for final signature before it gets fully executed. So with regard to our, just continuing on with the levels of efficiency, on our contracts, one of the things that we do, in addition to being signed off on by multiple folks, we like to know that certain, compliance measures are being met for outside and internal audits. So on our circulation cover page, the following information is required, and that's a detailed narrative of the activity, who prepared the environmental review, and when that was completed. So before anybody signs off from a compliance perspective, we know that an ER was done before it is moved forward. We also include the CFDA number, and we include the department search date, the sam.gov screenshot. So we know that that's been completed, the unique entity identifier. And again, that's all listed on there. And once contracts are fully executed, assigned programmatic and budget staff then set the activities up in IDIS. So I'm going to turn it over now to Alexis, and she's going to discuss financial caps.
So the City of Worcester establishes financial caps for planning and admin and supportive services once the formula allocations are announced by HUD. So we take our annual entitlement fund and we do that automatic 15% and 20% on that dollar threshold. The city sets its annual entitlement budget based on these two figures. So that's how we break out the remaining funds that are left and how we're going to allocate those between other projects that we're going to be establishing. So both divisions, we work closely together to make these decisions, but it's typically just that standard cap that we would go off of. Written accounting procedures. So the city of Worcester has grant policies and procedures to approve and record transactions. Our procedures provide standard forms that are required to be submitted with every request, as well as the staff that are required to review those requests. If any of the documentation or signatures are missing, then the request will go back to the program staff to make sure that those are actually reviewed and signed off on, and that all documents are complete. Once a request is fully approved, then the finance team, so my office, would go forward with creating a drawdown request in IDIS to receive those funds. We'd also send those payments to auditing to be paid. Our financial accounting system contains the basic elements of a chart of accounts, general ledger, cash receipts, and cash disbursements. Our cash disbursement journals. Every award is set up with a different organization each year, so that's how we segregate between each year of funding. It allows us to track better with IDIS so that we can see a one-for-one basis and make sure that every year is funded correctly and drawn down correctly. The financial policies and procedures, housed and budgets are accompanied by CDBG policies and procedures, and they were created by the Executive Office of Economic Development. And this document provides a comprehensive outline for all the CDBG activities. Meeting the requirements of 2 CFR Part 200 OMB uniform guidance. So the city of Worcester receives an audit every single year by an outside audit firm that can confirm that our accounting system and records meet the requirements of OMB uniform guidance to CFR 200. So because of the threshold, the dollar amount that we receive from CDBG, it typically gets selected for our single audit. So they would go through and test certain transactions and make sure that we're following things and providing the correct documentation.
I can take that last one.
Yeah, go for it.
So in closing, and just takeaways from this presentation and how Worcester has done things, it's imperative, we feel, to establish not only strong written policies and procedures for your CDBG program, but it's equally as important to create a sound and well-informed partnership between the programmatic and financial staff that will be involved with these resources. A team effort and proactive approach to managing CDBG while always keeping compliance at the forefront is crucial. An informed and creative finance staff who has been actively tracking resources can potentially find unexpended balances that might be able to purchase a valuable and much needed fire truck or pay for a playground project. Most importantly, having knowledgeable staff involved throughout the entire process has provided the city with peace of mind, knowing that all federal resources that are being managed, they're being managed appropriately and are benefiting those most in need and in a timely manner. Thank you very much. That concludes our presentation, and I will turn it back over to Les from ICF to handle the Q&A.
Thanks, Andy and Alexis. I wanted to kind of, we've had some really good themes from all of the speakers about having those systems in place. And so I'm going to ask all speakers, if you want to come back on camera, on a couple of these, I want to ask some questions kind of across the panel. So, I mean, it was great. So many of you were acknowledging, we got to get both internally and externally, we've got to get folks up to speed on training and keep those things in place. But you talked about, how to track these projects, not only financially, but I think also in terms of, are you on schedule? And what I wondered if folks could each talk a little bit about is, this kind of, I think, tags into what Andy was talking about with that team approach between the programmatic and the financial folks. I wondered if each of you could talk just a little bit about what you do when you know, what your options are on actions when you notice that you've got either a financial issue or a timeliness issue, and kind of how you between perhaps programmatic and financial folks, what some of those actions might be. So if maybe we can start with Crystal.
Yeah, fantastic question. So as mentioned, we're a little bit smaller of an office, probably the smallest that presented today. And so that might be of particular interest to smaller entitlement communities. So really, for a long time, there was a sole CDBG staff person, right? Just one. And so that can be tough. And so if you're coming kind of from that lens, you know, hats off to you, because I know that can be tough. But really, in addition to workload, we're really looking at how do we ensure that there are no mistakes happening or compliance issues happening. So some of those processes that we have in place kind of flag us to let us know something's a little awry here. And so let's delve deeper into that and see where in the processes did maybe a number get transposed. Was it when we put in an initial request to accounts payable for that reimbursement check to be issued? Was it when an IDS voucher was issued? Was it when we tracked the internal request at the very onset? So we go back and kind of cross-check all of those systems. On a higher level, to your point at the very beginning regarding what other systems can we use or put in place, we don't have a grant management system here. So dare I say we use very advanced Excel spreadsheets for all that internal tracking, which I know some folks are in that same realm. But I think through COVID, we've also had access to other kind of tech or project management capacities that have been helpful. For instance, in El Paso County, we use Microsoft Teams quite a bit, right? The Microsoft product suite. So for folks that use that, Microsoft Planner or Microsoft List is another great way to really ensure communication as well as movement along processes and get groups to work together. So there are some other things kind of outside of special purchase systems, if you're a smaller grantee, that maybe you can access to keep that communication flowing.
Great. Benjamin, want to take on that topic a little bit?
Sure. I guess what I would say is, in our organization, it's really about having good communication among the various team members. We are bigger. Our office does a lot more than just administering CDBG, but our office has 120 or 130 people. And we're administering CDBG, but we're also doing a lot of other things. And there's some folks, there are very few folks who work only on CDBG. And so really it's about having good communication links. We have a few key people who are really great at communicating between the finance folks and the program folks. Like they might be, I'll give an example. In our making grants to nonprofit organizations, predominantly for public services. On the finance team, we have one person who's really great at communicating over to the programmatic team that's administering those grants. And on the programmatic team, we have one person who's really good at communicating back over to the finance team. They both speak each other's languages pretty well. And we found that that type of communication really helps eliminate confusion and mistakes, because someone can say that we do a lot of cross-checking of each other's work, essentially. We'll get something from the program team. They'll say, this is how we're planning to deploy these particular grants. They'll send it over to the fiscal team, and the fiscal team will be like, it seems like you're missing one thing, or can you explain this? And it's really that we have the luxury of having more people, and we have those folks communicate well with each other to problem solve and support each other.
Great, thank you. And then Andy and Alexis.
Sure. I'd just like to kind of reiterate what my two colleagues said. Communication has been the key for us. We're really fortunate to have just a really good relationship between the programmatic side up in EOED, Executive Office of Economic Development, and our Budget and Finance Office. And not only is it important to have that good communication, but as I mentioned in my, in the presentation, we're constantly, keeping up with, what's going on, meaning like on an educational standpoint. So budget staff is going to the same trainings on the Code of Federal Regulations that programmatic staff is going on. So they're in the loop as to what's going to be required. They're looking for the same level of documentation that we'd be looking for upstairs. And every once in a while, there might be that one thing that, gets missed upstairs, but it gets caught downstairs. And it's that, hey, didn't see this. Can you guys make sure you put it in there, and we'll send it right down. So again, communication has been the key for us. And the other thing that really works well for us is that we meet quarterly, to go over all of the projects, whether it's CDBG, ESG, HOPWA. We go through and we just, where does this project stand? It's been in the system for a while. Is it moving? What's the realistic timeline? This project may need more money. Do we have unexpended that we can shift over? So having that good relationship and that dialogue just keeps things moving in a really good direction. And I'll turn it over to Alexis as the finance person to speak more on that.
Yeah, so I'll just add to that. So within our finance office, it's myself as the grants compliance manager, and then I have one staff that manages our HUD entitlement as well as some other grants with it for the city. So on a monthly basis, we complete a reconciliation to ensure that what we're drawing down is what we're showing in our financial management system. And very similar to Crystal, we don't have a grants management system. We use Excel, pivot tables, we do all of that. So that's what we primarily use. So we're making sure that all three of those areas are tying out exactly to what we're saying we've spent down. If there is an issue, myself and my staff will go through and say, okay, what did we miss? What's going on? How can we correct this? Is it an issue with us, or is it somebody charged it to the incorrect account? So we always look at that. So that's on a monthly basis. And we do share that with ED staff on a monthly basis, just so they can kind of get a feel for, this is how much we've spent this month. What else can we actually get going in projects moving to spend those dollars down? So everything is reconciled on a monthly basis, and I swear by that, making sure that we're on the penny for every single transaction, so that we're not going a month or two down the road and like, what happened here? So
yeah. And one final thing, that report that we get from budget from Alexis and her colleague is really helpful for us from a programmatic standpoint, because what they do is they break it out per department. So we have housing, we have neighborhood development, we have business assistance. And so every division head knows this is where your projects stand, this is where your current balance is. And it's really, really helpful for us to meet internally upstairs before we have our quarterly meetings with budget.
And then I guess a related question that we got that came in, and I think this would be particularly applicable if you were working with subrecipients. There was a question on monitoring, on whether monitorings were done jointly between programmatic and fiscal folks. I know some folks will use you've done cross training, and all your programmatic folks are sort of generalists, but they're looking for certain things, which then they alert finance to. So I don't know if Worcester, if you want to comment on that, and then I'll ask the others on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, the answer to that is we do combine our monitorings. So, what we do is we have our project monitor who's ever been assigned to that activity. If it's a public service activity, we'll have traditionally 2 to 3 staff working within the public service area. So whoever the project monitor is that's working on an activity, they will go out and do the programmatic monitoring, and budget staff will go out as well. Sometimes the monitorings are able to coordinate, the schedules work, and they'll go out together. But if not, then they'll go out at a later date or even prior. But in the past, we've tried to do them at the same time. It just works well for everybody. So we know that once, you leave that site, the monitoring is done on both ends. And it's easier on the subrecipient too, so they're not having to revisit that twice.
Great. And Crystal, this may not be as big of an issue with a smaller staff.
Right. Yeah, I will say, typically it is us that is handling all of it. However, I think it's important to note, especially depending upon size of county, all of our CDBG grant expenditures roll up into the county's finances, right, overall, which means that they're also looked at from a single audit perspective. Right. So that perspective is really also what brings in finance, and we provide our risk assessments that we do on all of our programs and projects to finance, as well as if they are flagged for an on-site monitoring, that follow-up monitoring form, where we do ask financial questions and things. So even though being a smaller staff and kind of handling that internally, all of this rolls up into a larger scale single audit, which ultimately does get looked at by finance staff.
Great. And Benjamin?
Yeah, in San Francisco, we have some specific team members who focus on monitoring of our subrecipients, who they're not on the finance team, but they have a lot of finance expertise and savvy, and they partner across. So if there's a programmatic question that they're not clear about, then they'll partner with the program person who's the lead in that area and say, hey, I saw this in the monitoring, it seems kind of weird, can we talk about it? Conversely, if they're looking at a subrecipient's audit and they see something that they're not familiar with or that is concerning to them, they bring it to someone on the finance team and say, who's a CPA who used to do audits of nonprofit organizations, and they say, hey, what do these words mean in this audit? Can you help me here? The other thing that I'll add, again, it's probably just more applicable to a larger government entity, but there may be some opportunities for more medium-sized government entities. In San Francisco, we have a lot of city departments who give grants to nonprofit organizations. And a lot of us give grants to the same nonprofit organizations for different types of services. And so in San Francisco, our controller's office, which is a citywide department, they coordinate monitoring across city departments, regardless of fund source. So that all of the people citywide who are involved in monitoring of nonprofit organizations and the services they provide, they all get together, they do group risk assessment, they do monitoring to try to minimize the number of times that they see someone from the city and county of San Francisco. They'll say, well, before we implemented this, they would see, 5 different departments in 5 different weeks. And now we're able to streamline that for our partners. And that also reduces the workload for the city overall as well.
That's a great comment. And I assume sort of hand in hand with that would be some sharing. So like if one program saw a red flag of some kind, that they would also, alert the other offices that there could be a risk for them based on what they're observing. Yeah, that's
yes,
great.
Exactly right. If we have, and we because we have that awareness already about which departments are funding which organizations, if one of us has a particular concern, the other departments know, within a few days or weeks about that, whatever that concern might be.
Okay. There were a couple of questions, couple of folks were concerned, Andy, because I think you mentioned about issuing agreements before there was a release of funds, but there is an ability to make those conditional based on that release of funds. Is there something you want to add to, like, how you protect in that process on any funds being expended prior to?
Oh, yeah. So what I was just trying to do is I was condensing kind of like our entire, when you do a presentation like this, you're not covering every aspect. So yes, obviously, we're not issuing a contract until a full release of funds has been granted. And again, it goes back to that circulation cover page on our contracts, for example, like where you have the narrative, but then you have all the environmental review information, when that was done, who prepared it, when it was finalized, all that. So yeah, nothing gets executed at all until we've gone through the entire process. So.
Okay.
And we
Me-
don't forward funds, so we don't release any of those funds until we're actually funded with an IDIS.
Correct.
So,
Right.
yeah.
I mean, you can actually do, in some ways, you can do like a subrecipient agreement that's conditional upon that. And then we have a finance system would have a hold on funds in place until that release of funds. But I think the best practice is just go ahead, get the environmental review, release of funds before you actually execute. So you're not having to track that.
Yeah, 100%. The only thing that we even come remotely close to on that is our home projects. And we'll issue a conditional commitment of home funds.
Right.
Because here in Massachusetts, I can't speak to other states, but to access state home money, you need that local contribution, that local commitment of funds. So we'll do a conditional commitment of funds, but even in that conditional commitment, it says pending full environmental clearance and all this other, stuff to protect us from moving, forward if we can. So, but that's the closest that we would come.
Great. Well, this actually brings us to the end of the time for the question and answer. First of all, I just want to say what a great panel. You did such a great job in presenting the information. I think that was probably very useful for folks. And folks may have more questions. We would encourage folks to reach out to panelists, but also Shan, or I think Claire, is going to mention about how to also have some further dialogue. So I'm going to hand things over to Claire, I believe.
Thanks, Les, and thanks everybody again for your presentations. So as Les mentioned, we have Whova up still, and it will be open for about 2 weeks. So if you all go to the link that Sean just dropped in the chat, we have the invite code in case you need it, and you can see the community boards for this session, for the prior sessions, and add any questions that you have. Converse with other grantees. We hope that you're able to make some connections. So even though this has been virtual, hopefully you still get a feel for the networking that you'd have at an in-person conference. So again, that will be open for a couple of weeks. So feel free to continue to log in, send your messages, see what's happening, ask your questions, and take advantage. Also just wanted to say a thank you. This is the last session, as you know, of the conference. So thank you all for attending. We had over 1,400 folks register for the conference, and we had 12 sessions on a number of programs over the course of the week. So a lot of CDBG, CV, and then also some guidance on ESG CV and HAPA CV. And then also, as you know, we had our 2 peer-to-peer best practices series, this being the last session in financial and administrative controls. And we also had our resilience best practices. And just want to let you all know that recordings and transcripts of the entire conference will be posted to the same conference page on the HUD Exchange. So if you have colleagues that you think would benefit from some of these sessions, feel free to send that link around. They can look at the slides, check out the recordings, and you can also check out sessions that you might have missed. So again, thank you to all the presenters from this week, the grantees, the TA providers. Thank you to my ICF colleagues, and then of course, our HUD folks who have put this all together.
And Claire, do we want to mention that HUD's going to be preparing a report on best practices for financial and admin controls, and that's something that's going to be posted on the HUD Exchange later this year.
Yes.
So keep an eye out for that.
Thanks, Les. Yes, so that is our final note to you. So this is not the end. You will continue to get more guidance and more best practices later in the year. So with that, I'm just going to thank everybody again for attending. Thank you for attending the conference as a whole, and we'll see you soon.